Hello, thank you for checking out my video. My name is Jeff Rolka. This is questions from comments 47. We're going to talk about the tongue trill versus a lip trill, or a tongue roll, if you will. We've got a question about the secondo passaggio, the so-called break, and consistency around it. We have a follow-up question that talks about whether or not it's really productive to follow along our idols or go after our own voices and things like that. Mezzos versus sopranos, all kinds of good things. This is one of my favorite segments, so I'm going to dive right in. Thank you if you've chosen to subscribe. If you haven't yet, I do hope that you will do so now. A humongous thank you to my Patreon supporters. Thank you so much for your support. You are truly what helped me to continue to make this happen. Thank you very, very much. Right. Number 1, questions from comments. You've been a tremendous help with soprano vocals. You're very welcome. I am happy to hear that. I have a question that I hope you can answer. I trained privately many years ago, but was never told about lip trills. I struggle with lip trills, but I can do tongue trills very well. That's a tongue twister right there. Do tongue trills, say that 5 times quickly, do the same thing as lip trills? I can move up and down easily doing tongue trills. Does it still stretch the vocal cords as lip trills? I hope you can answer this question. So a couple things here. There's one thing that you can certainly monitor with a tongue trill, the same way that you can with a lip trill, and that's continuity of airflow. So if you're doing you can tell that my airflow is moving consistently very easily. You can hear my tongue flapping away back there, right? Same thing would be true with lip trill. That might be where it stops, quite frankly, because when I do the lip trill, there is not even remotely close to the same kind of muscular engagement that I have to use with the tongue in order to get into a position so it can get in the way of the air column and then flap. Because when you do a tongue roll, you're gently pressing up with the tongue towards the roof of your mouth, only hard enough so that when the air goes through, it pushes it down and then it kind of pops back up and it rolls like that. So there's some tongue engagement there that might not be entirely advantageous. Also, and this may be different for different people, when I do a tongue roll, air isn't only going out of one spot. I can feel it coming off over the sort of side edges of my tongue, which aren't pressed against the roof of my mouth, and I can also feel it over the front edge. This is important because with the lip trill, you are creating what is called a semi-occluded vocal exercise. So the lips, because they're really in a closed position when I'm at rest, and when I start to move air, they part in response to the flow of air. But that barrier takes a little bit of the pressure off of the vocal fold, and that is what allows the vocal folds a little bit more release so they change shape more easily. And you might not be getting the same benefit with the lip roll. The thing to do would maybe to try like some straw phonation, see if that changes things for you. And also, it says you struggle with lip trills, but it doesn't say that you didn't say that you cannot do them at all. So maybe keep on struggling with them a little bit. Keep on practicing with those lip trills. See if you can get them to come into play, and then you'll really be able to tell the difference between the lip trill and a tongue trill and the advantages there. I always say this, lip trills are not the end-all be-all of vocal exercises, but they're really helpful. If you can get that as part of your practice, I think it would certainly yield great benefits for you. Why can't you learn both soprano and mezzo rolls, though? Shouldn't singers be more diverse if they want a job this day and age? There are pieces in the mezzo range and soprano roles I can totally sing. I don't remember exactly where I found this comment, but I kind of enjoyed it, and it was a bit jocular, and so I thought it was sort of fun to kind of talk about here for a minute. And there is a point to this. There is an awful lot of overlap in the various vocal range designations, right? So, for example, the middle voice range for a soprano vocalist is going to be from about here to here. And the middle voice range, so it's this space in between, the middle voice range for a mezzo soprano vocalist is going to be from about here to here. Not a huge difference. But if your song was written for a soprano vocalist and it's hanging out on that E flat all the time, you as a mezzo can probably sing it, but you need to consider that that melody is sitting right on top of your secondo passaggio, and that might prove more challenging than if you had a soprano's instrument. Conversely, if you are singing in this range, or the melody starts around this A and goes down to the C, soprano vocalists frequently will have some difficulties navigating their primo passaggios. Mezzos, a little bit less so, and so they will gain access through this register a little bit more easily. Both Fox, the soprano, and the mezzo could both sing that melody, but one may find it more challenging than the other. So it's important to know the composition of your instrument, the composition of your voice, if you prefer, and also consider your melody very carefully. It may have been written for a soprano or a mezzo, and you might be the other, and that doesn't mean you cannot sing it. It just means that you need to carefully consider where that melody's sort of strong points are, where it goes, and the different kind of challenge that you might encounter for singing a role that was for a different voice. Now, it's also worth mentioning, too, that the Fox system was originally designed so that opera directors could more easily find the vocalists suitable for the roles in their pieces. So instead of trying to know every singer's individual things, they came up with this shorthand system for saying, oh, that's such and such, they're a mezzo, they're a soprano, they're a lyric tenor, they're a robusto tenor, they are a lyric baritone, so on and so forth, right? All of these designations. In most popular music, it doesn't matter that much because the range isn't as vast as it can be in those roles. So if you're singing classical music and things like that, you want to very carefully consider these things and realize the additional challenges that may be in store for you. If you're singing popular music, it's still important to know your voice. It is absolutely important to know your voice, but it is equally as important to know the lines in the melody, the tessitura of the melody, where everything's going, all that kind of stuff. That, in fact, I would put as a precedent in front of knowing your own voice, because you can still maybe do the tune even if you don't know your exact vocal range designation, but you might just wonder why it's hard in some places or easier than others and things like that. Great question, though. Super fun. So this is a follow-up question. This was a follow-up question because this individual had a question in the previous questions from comments, and so I'm following up here. Skipping over a little bit. Hearing about IEM, those are in-ear monitors, and mics brings me to sounding the way that I like finding my voice. I used to imitate my favorite singers after a lot of warm-ups and exercises in your channel these couple of years. I went back to singing those Journey songs mostly, and I noticed that this time around, I did what my voice needed to do to get the notes. That's fantastic, and I applaud you. It can be very difficult to sing repertoire that you sang with a different technique in a new technique. Really, really well done. And also did, so they did it their way with sort of after having all this practice, and then also did my imitation version, and it was like forcing myself to place my voice where it didn't need to go. Here's the question. Is imitation a source of bad habits as opposite to a source of learning? Who knows if all the vocalists are really trained singers? Some might just be very gifted people. And then another question, I tend to use reverb or any effect very sparingly. I don't want to sound too processed. Should I worry about that at this day and age? Or it's just anything goes. One of these days I'll get in touch through your webpage. I look forward to chatting with you and working together potentially when that day should come. So first things first. There is a point to imitation in terms of learning style, learning affectation, but you are wise to consider that these songs and the vocalists that you are imitating, copying, if you will, there can be all kinds of different things going on. They are almost certainly playing to their strengths. So they have found these particular strengths that they embody, whereas you may do other things that they couldn't do at all. They can do things that are more challenging for us or you, or whatever. The song is in a key that plays to their strengths. So that's another thing to consider, is that if you are doing cover tunes, because you mentioned Journey songs, those tunes aren't keyed for your strengths. And so that is another thing to consider. You might change those things to play to your strengths. And though it sounds like you were met with a lot of success, in the future, you might consider that as well. I don't know that it's so much a source of bad habits, but that certainly can happen, and you can learn to try to do things with your voice that violate certain principles around honoring registration events. So part of the reason why vocalists can sound so seamless across such a wide tessitura is because they learn to honor their registration events, plan for them, and execute them well in a balanced capacity. If you are imitating someone based on sound alone, you might be missing where your registration event is meant to be, and so end up straining your voice, pushing too hard, pulling chest, all of those kinds of things. Paradoxically, if you want a consistent sound, you have to honor your registration events. We still, can learn a lot from these people, but we want to consider that our instrument may be different. Also, when you get vocalists that are singing in really extreme styles or with rather, shall we say, vast colorations to their voice, I'm sort of thinking of Kurt Cobain in the way that he sounded a lot of the times. When you get that far into one's own individual strengths, it's so far away from neutral phonation that you're getting into the specific traits of that singer's instrument, and your instrument may or may not do those things. This is why so much of my channel is about neutral phonation, about finding the neutral area of your voice. This is so that you can work on all those registration events and expand your range. But also then you have a balanced place from which to then explore other extreme styles. So if you haven't mentioned Nirvana, but if you were, and you want to sound that sort of lazy, aggressive kind of patois that Kurt Cobain had, start with a neutral delivery of the line to learn the notes, learn the registration events that you have to deal with, and then start to get your style into play a little bit at a time, finding what works best for you. And then another question, again, a very astute question, very wise question. Don't use reverb or effects. You only use them very sparingly. I don't want to sound too processed. Should I worry about that at this day and age? Depends on the style that you are using and the reason why you are recording what you are recording. If you are recording material for your own edification, for your own pleasure, if you will, then make it sound the way you want it to sound. It's your recording, after all. You get to make those choices if you are producing your own material. If, on the other hand, you are producing tracks that are supposed to sound like what you are hearing in the sort of top 10 playlists or the Billboard's top 100, then you would do well to listen very carefully to the effects that they are using in those tracks and emulate that style. I think right now we're in a sort of middling phase. I feel like we've just come out of a heavy reverb phase where things were sort of drowned in reverb, and it kind of cycles around. So we'll go through a very, very wet phase. We'll go through a very dry phase. There'll always be folks on the fringe that are doing their own thing, and that's cool too. So I will quote Madonna. I quoted her once recently on another video too. Make the album you want to make. Make the song that you want to make. Because you're going to live with it after it's done. You're going to be the person that either has to go out and sing it live, where maybe those effects will be necessary in the live performance, or you will be reminded of it all the time in its play on the Spotify or the radio or whatever it is you're trying to get music played on. And I hope that you are that fortunate to have your music played in that capacity. But yeah, make the album, make the song that you want to make. That, I think, is still the most important thing. I have a question. Yesterday, I had a performance, a cappella male quartet. It went like this. Warm-up felt great. Registration events occurred as they should, I think. But as we got on stage, the first song went well, but as we got to the end of the second song, I could feel my throat tense up. By the end of the fourth, I could only squeak out my notes. It felt as though my larynx was on its way out of my mouth, and I could not get it down to the position it was in during warm-up. Is this just nerves and technique? Got any tips? Yeah, tension tends to accumulate over time, and it can happen very, very rapidly. So you might notice it accruing over a song. Or in your case, if your subglottic air pressure, your support, if you will, is generally working a bit better, it might accrue over time. I would find a way to remind yourself to stay on the foundation, the engagement. I don't like to use the word support, but I'm talking about airflow and breath management. I'm talking about apagio breath management. I'm talking about subglottic air pressure and engagement of the core body muscles to support your singing voice. Find a way to remind yourself to get down into that space, maybe within each of the songs or in between songs, like have a reset for yourself before you get to the next tune. It doesn't have to be like a big protracted thing, just a moment of reflection, just a note to myself. Stay expanded, stay engaged. If your overall subglottic air pressure, if your engagement in the way that you are practicing, I hope you're practicing apagio. If you are practicing apagio, that will probably help. That is my go-to when I am basically doing anything that requires me to sing. If I am recording in the studio, if I'm singing on stage, if I'm wherever I'm singing, I am rooting down and I am reminding myself of my lateral expansion and the firmness, the consistency of my engagement, so that my voice stays flexible. Because it sounds like you're having good warm-ups because your technique is fundamentally there, but it's not staying with you throughout the duration of your gig. And I would start by finding ways to remind yourself of that foundation. Get back to that foundation within the tunes, or at the very least in between those songs, and see if that helps. And I suspect and hope that it will. Great question. I have a question about the second transition point. This would generally be referred to as the break. Here on my channel, I refer to this as the secondo passaggio. It is a change in the configuration of the vocal mechanism. As I approach the F4 F sharp 4 part of an exercise, I sometimes take chest voice up to the F. Other times I go into head voice on the F. One or the other just feels easier at the time, but this is not consistent. Once I reach F sharp, it's pretty much always head voice, because if not, I feel my chest voice sort of slipping into a beginning shout or belt sort of sound. So it doesn't matter if my transition point or secondo passaggio, second passaggio, but the term is secondo passaggio, but they've written second passaggio, varies a bit as long as I'm not pushing or forcing the top note. Yes and no. So you have to so try to notice when you have a tendency to kind of go that extra semitone versus when you don't. If it's on a certain vowel, then you have to listen to your body. In other words, try to feel intimately like what it is your body is doing. Notice how your body is working, how the vocal folds are feeling. Notice intimately what your engagement is like. Because one of two things is happening. You are either transitioning prematurely on the vowels where your tendency is to transition the semitone lower, or you're pushing the other ones out. Either way, it's great and advantageous to have a seamless and consistent registration event point when you are creating neutral tone in your singing practice. So what do I mean by all that? And I'm going to have a quick sip of water, but I will edit out the gurgling. The question is about this F4 and this F sharp 4. So if I sing, I will transition at the same spot for all of those vowels. If I had one vowel, and I'm looking at you, ooh, that wanted to go earlier, and there it came out of my head voice rather late, and you can hear that change in color. That's a cue there that something's out of balance. In this case, I'm doing it for illustrative purposes to show you what it sounds like, but you'll have to listen to your voice and see how it feels to see if you're either pushing some too high or going too low. On the other hand, if you weren't trying to sing with neutral tone production, then the secondo passaggio, the physical makeup of your system doesn't change. Like, your voice still changes, but it's going to operate differently. And that transition point will probably be lower. So, for example, if I wanted to have a kind of Chris Martin from Coldplay kind of sound to my voice, then I'm going to emphasize my cricothyroid dominant singing voice more, the head voiciness, if you will, of my head voice. That's going to change the color. It's also going to change where I make my registration event. So, like, same scale, neutral tone production. If I want to be Chris Martin-like, you can hear it's much more head voicey, and my registration event happened lower because I'm using my voice in a fundamentally imbalanced way. If I wanted to go even further, and I was going to be more Aaron Neville-like, so it's very kind of light and effervescent, maybe there's a bit of air seeping over the vocal fold, then you're going to hear even more of those affectations. The registration event honestly might not be much lower, but it might still be a semitone or two lower. Let's find out. Very, very light. You use a lot of air with that much air seeping over the vocal fold. But those are the things to look for. Try your scales, listen carefully, pay attention as much as you can to the usage of your body and how your voice is feeling. And that will help you determine whether or not you're kind of changing too early on some vowels or maybe changing too late, or even if there's a difference in vowels. If it's consistent across all the vowels, then it could just be the day. It takes a lot of energy to maintain the subglottic air pressure to keep the vocal fold flexible in that way. And some days you might be tired. That can happen too. Observe it for a couple of weeks and see if that shows you anything about your voice, and then maybe drop another comment and let me know what's going on. I'd love to hear more and see if we can work this out. And that's Questions from Comments 47. Thank you all so very, very much. I do hope that you've chosen to subscribe. If you haven't yet, I do hope that you'll do so now. And one more big thank you to my Patreon supporters, where you can get MP3s and PDFs of the practices that I release here on YouTube. Have a wonderful day. Take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing. Hopefully we'll see you again. Bye.